It is the Rotoballer PGA show for the Shriners Children's Open in my main man Spence's backyard. A new backyard with a nice new studio. Spence, you looking good. Your studio's looking good. What's cooking, dog?
I appreciate that, Byron. Yeah, it's still kind of a work in progress. There's a handful of pictures that I don't have on the wall yet, but it is the unveiling the last 2 weeks. When I did the show with Joel and David over at Win Daily for the PGA Draftcast, I think that was the running gag that it looked like I was in some sort of like an insane asylum with nothing in the backgrounds. But pictures are up now, kind of all the things that represent me that maybe in the last location weren't able to be seen. We're going to be putting that in the background. So very excited to be doing this show with you today, though, Byron.
Yeah, dude. It's been, I've been to Tennessee. I've been to Montreal. I've aged. I've seen my priest. I've done a lot of stuff, Spence, since we last spoke for the Pro Core. Apologies to all of y'all who we haven't serviced with the show, but we will be going back to our regular programming at 6 Central, 7 Eastern. I'm a little rusty doing the show with you. It's been a long time, Spence, but let's get into the Shriners. But before we do that, how was last week for you at the Black Desert Championship?
I mean, profit-wise, it wasn't exactly where I want to be with it. I'll let you talk about the event. If Steven Yeager could have won on Sunday, that would have helped. There was a swing that occurred in the matchup market where Seamus ended up tying with Bo Hostler. That actually could have been a victory out of nowhere there. But, a subpar week at the end of the day. Didn't have a bunch of Matthew McCarty, unfortunately, for DFS. So I know that if you read some of the Rotoballer work that is put out there, Matt Miller did have McCarty as one of his names that he gave out. So a lot of success was had on the Rotoballer side. Can't say it was from me. How'd the week go for you, Byron?
Spence, I have been man down for like the last 2 weeks. So I, did my shows, all that jazz. I never put out any content last week outside of 1 or 2 videos. And I watched like the first 9 on Thursday. Like that's just where I've been. But don't fret, people. I am now 100% back, more back than Robert Saleh. And that is saying something. So we rocking and rolling this week for the Shriners. I'm recharged. I'm rejuvenated. We are ready to party. I got myself a nice raspberry twisted tea. If Twisted Teas finds us out there, we want to be sponsored by them because this is what we do over here. So cheers to all of you guys out there. Monday Night Football, Shriners, Spence, let's get into it. Give me your key metric off the tee this week at TPC Summerlin in your backyard.
This is a very wide open venue, and I always talk about this, and I don't have an extensive golf background as far as playing as you do, Byron, but there are certain things that like that this would be what I would consider to be my home course. Like for the very little golf that I do play, that's one of the venues that I have seen in action a couple of times. So I think when you look at TPC Summerlin from a metric standpoint, this is one of those prototypical desert courses. You're going to have driving distance that's going to matter in the desert air. Very simple course. You have that TPC resort style feel to it. I think there are a couple caveats, though, that I'm just going to bring up. We can discuss it over the next 48 hours as we get some more details that end up entering the mix here. But one of the things that comes into play is Vegas can get very windy. And anytime we've ever gotten any protection from this course, it comes because of the wind. And I noticed, I guess yesterday would probably be the prime example of it. It was the first night in quite a few months where you actually got a wind chill at night that ended up occurring. So this desert heat is still there, but there are projections in the forecast of wind that are supposed to come on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if this gets a little bit windier, I think that's a category that we can look for to try to measure inside of a statistical model. But outside of that, this is a very prototypical birdie scoring course, bent grass greens. There's 3 proximity buckets that I looked into of birdie making potential from those buckets. You get almost a 7.5% increase from that area. That would be from 100 to 125, 125 to 150, and then from 200 plus. Those are the really big areas that you need to find success in. It doesn't mean that if you're doing it in one and not the other, that you can't find that high end upside that we're trying to locate here. But birdie making potential at the end of the day, however you're going to go about it, is going to be the number one thing to find success. It's one of those venues, Byron, as I think we know with every TPC property and birdie making resort style course, you got to get to 20, 25 under, somewhere in that range, unless you get that wrinkle to the game where weather comes into play or wind. And if that is something we'll find more about, I guess, over the next handful of hours.
And if I were to adjust my model for any sort of wind or anything, would you increase your ball striking, or kind of just from a very basic perspective, go a bit more to the short game side of things, chipping, putting, because you're having to scramble a bit more?
I think you can do it both ways. The one thing I wouldn't do is look more into the putting category. It's for this being a birdie making resort style course, it's one of the really rare venues out there that didn't get ramped up production on the putting side of the equation. It's actually lower in dispersion of scoring. So you get an increase that occurs from around the green, you get an increase that occurs off the tee, and you get slight decreases that occur from your approach game and from your putting. I still think the approach game is critical from those distances that I talked about if you wanted to get a little bit more heightened in those areas. But if you can dominate off the tee and you can find that savvy around the green game, which has been something that a lot of players in the past have been able to find success with, that's more so of where I would be pushing the metrics if we do get wind.
Perfect. I actually really like that, Spence, especially with how important the wind or around the green play at this venue is in general. I think that'll come into play even more if we do see it being windy. So, as always, we'll start off the show, or continue the show, with our top 10 rankings of our models. And Spencer goes ahead and aggregates his upside, his safety, all to get one ranking for this. I'll be using an upside ranking. We'll be throwing out some safety values along the way. For me, upside kind of just uses higher percentages of guys like 75th percentile strokes gains. And I'm also incorporating a lot of top 5 and top 10 percentages into those metrics. Safety, I've got top 20s, top 40s, and a bit more like average median numbers than the high upside strokes gain side of things there for me. So that's just why I thought I'd share that with you guys so you don't land up being a little confused going into this. But we appreciate all of you guys for showing up. It is the fall swing, so seeing y'all in the chat, hit us with comments, hit us with questions. We will answer them to you guys. This is especially the season to answer all the questions, because we want to engage with you guys, and you're going to get great access to us because there's less people and everyone wants to watch football stuff. So we appreciate all of you, especially Dylan, saying that Spencer's room looks amazing, which I could not agree with more. So Spence, tell me right off your right shoulder, what jersey is that?
Frank Thomas. It's personally signed. My father worked, he did fitness training, personal trainer, and he was the personal trainer for Frank Thomas's wife. And so he got it personally signed for me. I have a baseball also that's signed from him, but it's Frank Thomas there. And then everything that's above that would be Jerry Tarkanian, a Tark towel, and then a UNLV thing there.
Oh, I'm trying to manipulate. I'm too scared to remove myself in case we just crop the broadcast to pieces. Yeah, but we'll do a deep dive of Spence's background at some point, yeah, when we get the opportunity. But Spence, number 10 on your rankings list, who is it?
It ended up being Chan Kim for me. I think there's a lot of players that are in that general section, whether we're talking about the mid to upper 7,000s to that lower $8,000 range. Chan Kim, JJ Spawn, Patrick Fishburne. I kind of like Ben Silverman a little bit. There's a lot of those names that I'm going to find exposure to. And the one thing I just want to talk about very quickly, because when I talk about upside in my model, I'm talking about upside from a statistical perspective. These are players that are better geared or better suited for the course from a statistical perspective, throwing every single other wrinkle that to the equation out the window. So my overall rank ends up taking in a lot of safety into the mix. I want players that are bringing in good form. I want golfers that are good for this course. When we look for these upside numbers or volatility numbers in my model, it's going to try to find some of the best performers just from a statistical perspective. And I'm going to throw one name out there, Byron, that is not inside my top 10, but was one of the big climbers for me. And I know we're probably not going to see eye to eye on this golfer, just because I know that you've talked about him in the past, to where when we think of an upside name, I don't think Maverick McNeely is typically the option that you end up going towards. But I will say this about McNeely this week. There are a few things about his profile that are really enticing. And maybe for DFS, you're not going to necessarily get that same rebate just because we're talking about a mid to upper $8,000 golfer. But I think one of the things that people have talked about is that Maverick was an overrated commodity to start this fall season. There were a lot of weeks where he was 20-1, 25-1 to win these golf tournaments. And then he goes back-to-back missed cuts. And now all of a sudden on Monday, he drifted all the way up to 55-1 in the market. There is a much different discussion to be had. And I think that's the point that you and I, or at least a conversation that we always bring up on this show, or that I try to bring up on this show, is just because somebody doesn't in your mind have the upside that you think that they should, it's all relative to the strength of the field, and it's all relative to the movement of the market. So McNeely was one of those names for me where I thought there was an overcorrection that occurred for him when he moved up to 55-1. We always think about venues where he finds success: bent grass greens, TPC properties, West Coast golf, desert golf in general. He checks all of those boxes. And the reason why I believe, first of all, he's going to potentially be lower owned for DFS, but also we got this boost in the market to begin with of his price. Back-to-back missed cuts, and you have this really wonky output of course history. If you look at his last result here, he's produced, but it's a lot of subpar finishes from him. So it's like, it's one of those courses that if we base it off of last year or the last time of him playing it, a lot higher upside. If you base it off of every other performance, it's a lot lower of a floor. But I just thought he drifted too far. And, maybe for DFS, which is the reason why we can still have this discussion, is that price tag stayed a little bit higher than maybe some people would have thought it would have. And for me, there is a potential leverage opportunity that comes into play here with McNeely. So Chan Kim will technically be my number 10. I know we spent more about Maverick McNeely lower beneath that, but
what number is Mav?
But I just wanted that as the honorary mention of a golfer that we can discuss this week. And I think that that's the really important outlook there between upside and safety and markets of where you want to be playing those names. If I'm making a matchup bet, I'm not necessarily rushing to go bet McNeely, but if we're talking about GPPs or we're talking about upside, all of a sudden McNeely becomes more enticing for me than a lot of these names I'm going to bring up in this general section here.
I'll second that with you, Spence. Mav is 14th for me in upside. He's 14th in DK pricing. But if we take a look at his top 10 rate, and for me, I use the last little 12 months, 6 months, and 3 months. They all weigh the same. So however well you've done in the last 3 months, you're counting that 3 times. And he's top 10 in top 10 rates, So he's been showing up that 3M top 5 where he almost won, kind of showed us that lack of upside, so to speak, when he kind of just pooped down his pants down the final holes there. But, when he's 3-putting as one of the best putters on tour on the Sunday, that's not ideal. But still, he's showing some form. Like you said, checks a lot of boxes like that a lot. Chan Kim is number 10 for me in safety, Spence, because he just hasn't had a top 5 in the last little while. So it's not ideal for Chan, but I don't mind him. I love him for a round 2 showdown, especially in round 2s. This guy is a savage. So topping off some Chan Kim love there, since you never gave him too much attention because you really want to chat about Mav. But I'll go to my number 10th golfer, and it's actually Kurt Kitayama, who I tweeted out earlier. He's got incredible stats because his 75th percentile strokes gain numbers are pretty high, but he has no top 5s, but he leads this field with a top 40 rating, Spencer, of 71%. Like, he's just inside the top 40 non-stop, but hasn't had a top 5 as a Bay Hill winner, 2 or 3 years ago. So he's done his thing, but minus 200 for a top 40 is a tough number to go off of someone that just WD'd like 2 weeks ago. So we're going to have to kind of let that bet get away from us. But at $9,700, I think he's a good cash game play. And I think that's about it for me. I'm not looking to spend that kind of capital on someone that hasn't finished inside the top 10 yet. So that's my situation there. Then for number 9, I'm going to go with Ben Griffin, who has been showing a little bit of form here and there. I was chatting to someone that watches our shows and stuff in the DMs, and he actually landed up betting Griffin live after round 1. I think he was like 55-1 still, and then made a charge up in round 2 and kind of just didn't quite get all the way up the leaderboard there. So we'll see what Benny Griffin can get up to, but $8,200, Spencer, I think that's a very affordable price. He's one of the cheapest guys I have, not named JJ Spahn, inside the top 11, who's my honorable mention. And Ben Griffin at $8,200 is very affordable from a price tag perspective. He's solid inside the top 40s. He's got a 60% clip there. So lots to like about Benny G. We'll see what he can get up to. Who's your number 9 golfer?
It's going to be Seamus Power for me. I bet Seamus Power last week. I made a very strong argument that Seamus should have been the favorite in that tournament. And it's one of those unfortunate situations when you get easy golf courses. Seamus shot himself out of that tournament on day 1. It was a very good effort. He's 1 over after Thursday. He ends up making the cut. He climbs the leaderboard inside of the top 11 when it was all said and done. And I talked about the bet I had with him against Bo Hostler that actually should have been a winner out of nowhere there. And it's unfortunate. I feel like in the matchup market, that's usually been my bread and butter over the 6-7 years I've been in this space. And it's gone very ice cold for me over the last 3 or 4 months. And it's a lot of situations like that to where you either get the overperformance on one end, which I had Andrew Novak over Ryan Fox, and Ryan Fox was one of the big overachievers for me in my model. He ends up pretty much stinking it up for the most part after day 1. And then Novak just can't really get his feet out of the sand, ends up withdrawing before the round continues again on Saturday. Just was in one of those positions to where he wasn't going to likely make the weekend. And, I don't think there's much more of a concern than that about this week. But
did Fox miss the cut, Spence?
Fox made the cut, but Fox was one of the golfers that I thought should have missed the cut according to my model, and then had a terrible Saturday round. And that's usually the frustrating thing that you find yourself in, is where you feel like you successfully end up fading a golfer to where like the market was too high on them and you do it with the wrong name, like Andrew Novak. And for me, that's one of the reasons why moving forward, it's going to be a lot more emphasis on some of these in-tournament bets. Always had a couple % more of an edge to begin with in that market. And I think over the last 3 or 4 months, for whatever the reason is, and part of that, just for the record, is books have gotten a lot savvier with who they're placing these opponents against. You don't find nearly as many edges at the end of the day there. But if you look specifically at Seamus, who ends up being a push against Bo, if you just bet him over on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and find the right matchup against him there, Seamus wins you money at the end of the day. So I think Seamus, everything that he's been providing recently looks good in my model. He's top 15 in all iterations if I'm looking. I don't think this is quite as ideal of a venue for him as we got last week. And I know that's a weird answer to give for a golfer that still couldn't even crack the top 10. And, we're sitting here now 9th in this model for this week. But I think Seamus is a good, safe golfer that has been performing very well over the last handful of months. So safety markets with Seamus, I'm all fine with that.
I've got Seamus Powers at 35-1, Spence. I think at a venue like this with wedge intensities, kind of short positional golf courses, this is what we do with Seamus Power. Now, it's a West Coast type venue. It's not necessarily like on the coastline or anything, so to speak, but I'm a fan of Seamus. 35-1 seems very fair number for someone that's been rattling off, not like high-end finishes, but he's been 11th, and 10th in like 3 of his last 4, which is good to see. The 7th place finish here last year. So go ahead.
I was just going to say he's 5th in my model over the last 24 rounds when I weighed the metrics specifically for this course. So there's a lot to like about Seamus. And, if this year has taught me anything, I guess, it feels like in a lot of these situations, I have been a week too early in a lot of these spots. So if that ends up being the case, Byron, and I didn't go back to Seamus at a better number, I have no issues with anybody who wants to bet him at 35-1. I think there's a handful of names that I will talk about throughout this show that I liked ever so slightly more, but Seamus is in form with a statistical profile that makes sense. And when you usually get those two things mixing together of the current form mixed with the statistical profile, that's where the upside marks of actually winning golf tournaments come into play more often than not.
Amen, baby. Let's go. I need a Seamus W in a big way, Spencer. I need a W. I'll take it from anyone, even Caitlin Clark right now on a golf course, who's basically making only ones out there in a pro-am. All right, number 8 for me, Spence. Did you mention you're an 8th guy?
My 8th will be JJ Spawn at 7,900. That's kind of in the same range of what I was talking about with Chan Kim there. And Spawn specifically, there have been a lot of golfers, him and Bo Hostler being the two that I think of most often at this course, that really have the potential to spike at this tournament on Thursday. And for whatever reason, haven't been able to hold it together long enough for 4 days to capture this title. But Spawn is one of those names that if you look at what he has done, and I think we've talked about this, Byron, it's been so long since we've talked, but one of the things that I mentioned about Spawn when we went to the Procore is he almost was one of those unlucky golfers to where that break hit him at the wrong time. He had all the statistical data points pointing in the right direction for him. And, unfortunately, he got iced for a very short second there. But if you look at what he has done just since this restart for himself, obviously the withdrawal at the Sanderson, but 26th at the Procore, 25th at the Black Desert last week. I think we're still in that range where he can find high upside. I thought the upside outright number for him was enticing this week. Didn't get there on that price, but on the short list, probably with the Seamus Powers and a couple others, to where I did consider trying to find a way to get more exposure, but at least for DFS purposes, he will be in my player pool.
I love it. Like I said with you earlier on my honorable mention, I love a JJ Spawn, especially at $7,900, especially if people got WD'd on. That can keep the ownership a smidgen down, so that's always good to see. And I mentioned Kurt Kitayama with the best top 40 rate in the field out of top 5 since like the last 14 months. I'll switch it around on you. Keith Mitchell, this dude is crushing right now. Spence, he has got the 3rd worst ranking of strokes gained at TPC Summerlin for all the courses that they've played. It's Kevin Kisner and like Zach Blair, 2 guys ahead of him. He's played like 65 courses, 66 courses. This is his 55th worst strokes gained venue. He's had 4 miscuts and a 60th year. My model's telling me to bet the bejesus out of his top 20 metrics and his top 20 numbers. But when your course history, and this golf course is actually quite predictive when it comes to course history, like not Augusta-esque, but I'd say in the 2nd tier for sure. It's very predictive with Tom Kim going back-to-back, with Martin Laird always playing well at these kind of places. So you can see it. And Keith playing good golf, not a TPC Summerlin. So he's 8th for me, but number 1 for safety. But at this golf course, I don't measure enough course history to really impact Keith that much. The rest of his game and current form really doing the heavy lifting there for his metrics for me. But just wanted to mention that Keith hasn't played well yet. So do you have Keith coming up at any point soon?
I don't, but the one thing I will say, and I think it just doubles down on the answer you just gave, Byron, he's 29th for me overall. He's 6th for upside. He's 46th for safety because of all those answers that you just talked about. If I am playing Keith Mitchell in any capacity this week, it would be to shoot for the top 10, top 20 sort of a route with him. I'm not playing him for safety markets. There's too much volatility that comes into the mix. And, for GPPs, that's a discussion we can have when we see ownership. But I think there's a relatively high ceiling, even if he hasn't shown it, and a very low floor, which he has exhibited over and over again. He is the number 1 player in my model for weighted scoring for this course. I don't know why that does not translate. It's, one of those question marks.
It is, I saw Established Runs trying to get a data scientist or whatever for them for golf. And they were asking about Patrick Rodgers and how he'll play the first hole at Augusta, which he's never played ever in his career. Fun fact. But putting whole metrics together like that, it can just be a golf course. You just don't feel comfortable at a venue. It's just an interesting thing like that. So maybe he just doesn't feel comfy here. The last 3 times he has played, I think he's missed the number on the number. So it's not as dire as it has been, but the juju at this golf course is just not there for Killer Keith. So we're going to leave him alone. Number 7 for me is Eric Cole, who's been showing some form lately, Spencer. So we like to see what he's been up to. Guy's been dangling us with top 20s like crazy. 7th at the John Deere, 7th at the Wyndham, 18th at the St. Jude, 16th at the Sanderson. So lots to like about him. And at a golf course like this, where you've kind of just got run-of-the-mill type stuff going on, I think he suits this golf course very nice. He's $9,000 flat. I wanted to bet him top 10. Just missed out on a percentage point there. Probably would bet him at like plus 350. I'm seeing numbers at plus 333. So plus 350 would get us there. But I'm being niggly. It is what it is. So Eric Cole, 7th my model, for upside, 13th for safety. Who is your number 7 ranked golfer?
Yeah, I like the Cole call on your part. Cole, McNeely, Ben Griffin are probably the 3 names in that $8,200, the $9,000 range that exhibits some of that top 20, top 10 sort of upside marks, to where if I'm trying to shoot for a little bit more potential, those names become more enticing than my golfer, who would be my number 7 here, as Tom Hoge. I think Tom Hoge is fine for safety markets. Some of the upside numbers in my model leave something to be desired. I never love, and I'd like to see where the ownership lands before I make this bold of a statement. But typically when you land into these spots where there's negative trajectory for upside and a projected ownership percentage that's going to come into the mix, those are usually your prototypical cash game plays. Those are usually the names that I am not overly looking to play for large field GPP contests. You can play them for some of those events, but when we get into the really large field events, I do think you lack some of the upside that they possess. So, look, I think he's okay for safety. You can see that in the course history minus what he exhibited here in his last go around. But I don't know. It's the safety number more than the upside numbers. That's what's carrying it for him.
I'll jump in here and say Tom Hoge's my number 6th ranked guy, and I won't be playing him at $9,800. I'll be betting him, though, at plus 130 for a top 20. Does that at a 40% clip, Spence, inside the top 5, 6% of the time. Like if you're trying to roster any of these guys in the upper 9s, 10s, you need double-digit top 5 rates, like in order for me to really get to you there, unless you're projecting very well. But what I am excited about Tom Hoge for is the course history is great. Missed the cut here last year or whatever. 24th, 14th, and 4th in the last 3 times before that, and showed us with a little 7th place at the 40 net the last time he teed it up. So I think he was kind of burnt out, Spencer. He started the year fantastically, and we saw this with this year. Like some guys started off hot and then just completely disappeared as the season went along, and I think he needs to be rejuvenated a bit. Granted, we are close to Vegas now, and we know Tom Hoge's got a craps addiction. He likes to roll that dice, but I'm going to take my chances on him. He must feel like at home. Him and you, basically bunkmates here. So Tom Hoge, 6th in model for me. Thought I'd just top that up there with you. Who's your 6th ranked guy?
Yeah, I also like that way to play him. Like the only 2 players for safety in my model that would be higher than him would be Tom Kim and Taylor Pendrith. And when we're talking about safety markets, there's probably not a market for these higher end guys that I'd rather get to than a top 20. That's usually the ideal way to try to play them. When you talk about names a little bit further down the board, it's usually the top 40s that you want to get to. But when you get higher up on the list, it's the top 20 range. So I think Hoge as a top 20 makes a lot of sense. We've seen it with the course history. My number 6 guy will be Matthew McCarty. Some of that's going to come into play here just because you play 3 times on tour and one of those becomes a win. You're going to shoot up on a model, and it's a thing with him. And I give credit to the market. If you look at his first start that he had, he was one of the favorites to win the golf tournament. And while he did slip a couple points last week, he still remained in that range of like one of the top, 20, 25 favorites to win the event. So markets were very savvy on him. We now get this price bump and this hike in the price that I guess all of a sudden starts worrying you a little bit more, because it's a lot different to where when you're looking at an outright number here at 30, 35 to 1, which is more of where it opened at the very first time he played. I don't think he's going to go back to back necessarily, but the profile looks very good in my model. So number 6 player for me, I think the price tag and everything that you're looking for there, like there's a handful of names that are $9,000 or above. Like I'll give you all the names that technically show as a value. It would be Eric Cole if I ran it for upside. It would be McCarty. Seamus is very close. We'll talk about Bo Hostler later. And then you have Taylor Pendrith and Tom Kim that are priced pretty much right around where they should be. So it would be hypocritical for me to come on the show and go completely against my model in this position. But I just want to warn everybody, we're dealing with a very short term sample size, very uncomfortable range for me to be considering there.
Yeah, I've got him ranked third for myself as well, upside 9th for safety. Look, this dude has won 3 times on the KFT, one on his 3rd start on the PGA Tour. I mean, this is incredible stuff. You know, we are seeing a superstar being born potentially. I mean, he's got more wins than Tommy Fleetwood on the PGA Tour. So we've got that going for him there. Not to take a dig at old Tommy there, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. So $9,100. Glad to see that DraftKings has adjusted their pricing quite nicely to kind of reflect that the week after a win on the PGA Tour, maybe that the air is out the balloon a touch, but hey, you know, you never know. You ride that train until it comes off the rails, if it ever does, for old Matthew McCarty. So, Spencer, who's your 5th ranked golfer?
It's Davis Thompson for me. A lot of that was propelled. I put 15% of my weight on, I ran a corollary comp venue of courses that possess easy scoring nature. Davis Thompson was the #1 player in my model in strokes gained total on easy scoring courses. He's also the #2 player in my model in strokes gained total when I just ran it for any generic course. So I think Davis Thompson's ability to hit the ball, like from a total driving perspective, there's hard to find very many golfers in this field that are going to be better than him. So that just naturally possesses a higher ceiling in my mind.
3 better than him in this field.
I'll tell you, you can tell me who those are. I'll tell you who in mine would be better, but there's not going to be many also on that list.
It is, when this thing filters on me, Kevin Doherty, Cameron Champ, and Patrick Fishburne. It's just nuke cities for all 3 of those guys.
I just realized, and I don't know how I did this, I have Kevin Daugherty, or however we pronounce it, in my model twice. So technically, he can't be ahead of him twice in this. Patrick Fishburne would be another one. And then I do have Keith Mitchell higher. I know that hasn't worked for this course, but yes, there's very few names at the end of the day.
Yeah, not too many. Either way, great golfer, great driver of the golf ball, winner of the John Deere Classic when I was there. So continue, Spence. Sorry.
I also don't understand, and this is going to have to be something that I'm going to look into. I don't know how Kevin Daugherty is 115th in my model and also 117th in my model. So something has misread somewhere for him where he might be pulling a stat from somebody else. So I will get that changed. But no, I like Davis Thompson for all the reasons that we talked about for 5th. And then have you given your 5th name yet?
I will go ahead and give you my 5th as Cameron Davis. So we go from Davis Thompson to Cameron Davis. And I think, you know, this dude, if you're taking a look at what he's been up to the last little while, was inside the top 10 in strokes gained total for me. The around the green play is really popping nicely here. The tee to green game overall is actually really solid for him. And I think $8,800 isn't a terrible price tag either. Looking at a top 20 bet for him at plus 187 kind of checks out nicely too. Got a 6% edge there. 26th, 19th, and 40th in 3 of his last 4 starts. Has never finished worse than 52nd at this golf course either in the last 4. So we're starting to see him really kind of shine at this venue. I like Cam Davis. I mean, this dude's got some stuff to prove. I think he's been trying to really he hasn't played a tournament since the President's Cup, which I think he got snubbed on a touch, but you know, it is what it is. So maybe he's out here for some vengeance. So I'll take some Cam Davis top 20 at plus 187. Tires paid in full. Nice little top 20 edge there. It's the only market outside of the win market that he's been profitable in this last 12 months. So you're getting a bit of everything there from Davis Cameron after you mentioned there Davis Thompson. So apologies there, confusing you guys, dropping out Davis a million times. But who's your number 5, Spence?
Davis Thompson is my 5. So my 4 will be, I don't know if you've seen my model, Byron. Have you happened to see it before I ask this question?
I have not. No.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question here. There is one golfer in this field who ranked inside the top 25 of the field. When I looked at birdie or better percentage from those 3 separate ranges, proximity buckets that I talked about. So that would be 100 to 125. This player's in the top 25 of the field in birdie or better percentage. 125 to 150 inside the top 25 of this field. 200 plus inside the top 25 of this field. Would you like to guess who this player is?
Patton Kazaya.
I will tell you where Kazire is. I think he graded very well in those metrics also. The name is going to be somebody who is going to be extremely popular. And I wish that we didn't have this hometown narrative, home course narrative that was coming into play. It's actually Harry Hall. And Harry Hall, when we look at his profile and we compare it like for a specific venue like this to a lot of other places, he gets one of the most significant bumps in upside that I have seen in a really long time. Inside the top 5 of my model for weighted strokes gain total, inside of the top 5 of my model for strokes gain total at easy scoring, inside of the top 10 of my model for weighted scoring. And as I talked about, the number 1 player when talking about these key specific ranges that we're going to be looking for that birdie or better percentage. So TPC Summerlin is his home course. He is a UNLV product. He is going to carry a ton of exposure and a ton of popularity because of that reason. That is unfortunate, but I do think that this is one of those positions where you look at the course history, you merge that in with the current form that he's bringing into the mix here, some of this desert golf upside that he's shown in the past. I really like Harry Hall this week. I bet him at 55-1. Think we might get into the range of being wild. We'll use the word wild and not something more extreme of what the ownership percentage will be. I think it's going to be up there, though. Would not be shocked if he ends up being the first, second, or third highest owned player. And, unfortunately, we just experienced this same exact game with Patrick Fishburne last week. I'm hoping that maybe potentially lowers the ownership a little bit of people, even though Harry Hall's not the one that produced the problem. Maybe people go, I don't want to get caught in the same narrative twice, and Hall's a little bit lower owned, but I love the profile that he possessed this week. It was the very first outright bet that I made.
Interesting, Spence. So I have a question. So of the 3 key buckets that you mentioned there, from call it 100 to 125, 125 to 150, and 200 plus, I'm assuming it's a 200 plus. I'm just looking at his strokes gained approach numbers from those metrics. I don't have the birdie numbers available to me, but I'm assuming that's what's doing the majority of the heavy lifting there.
Yeah, it's what it ends up being with him is it's boom or bust profile, to where when you take certain proximity buckets, they don't look as good, but when you throw them onto these birdie or better percentages, he produces birdies at a higher rate, which is one of the reasons why at easy scoring courses, he all of a sudden sees this massive increase that occurs because, like Christopher just said, like he goes lights out, like he gets nuclear when he catches fire with his game. And at these easy scoring courses, that is what I am looking for. I understand, like, and this is something that we can talk about that even fits into your model more so than the way that I specifically build mine. But when we're trying to find golfers that can reach these certain threshold numbers, to where I talked about at the beginning of the show, unless we get a lot of wind here, which is still in the forecast as a potential that could occur, and this drops into this, 16, 17, 15 under, whatever range we want to call it. If it's not that and it's 20 to 25 under, we're going to need the potential to get very hot very quickly with certain aspects of your game. And Harry Hall possessed that quality better than pretty much anybody in my sheet that wasn't named Maverick McNeely, surprisingly, on that. So there's a reason why those were the 2 names, where I think McNeely you got the rebate on because of the form. Hall, 55-1 feels probably shallow to a lot of people. I think you think Harry Hall and you want more like 80, 90, 100-1. But I thought both of those 2 numbers, for 2 completely different reasons, ended up being a value at 55-1. And I do think that as this week moves on, I don't know where the market has moved at this point, I would not be shocked if both of those 2 numbers got shorter.
Oh, yeah, dude. I mean, we've got Tom Kim, Adam Hadwin, Matthew Neesmith, and Harry Hall as the 4th strokes gained history metric for me. Like Adam Hadwin, by the way, fun situation. Like, this guy loves this golf course. It's something about it. Been playing terribly, but we can chat about him on the gourmet
desert golf in general. Desert golf seems to be where out of nowhere he ends up popping. It's a very strange. Yeah. Yep.
He plays well there, which is 3 different courses. So he's just a phenomenon. But we'll see what he gets up to. We can chat about him here shortly. I've got Spence. Number 4 for me is Tom Kim. Just, I understand the course history, obviously. I haven't weighted it that much. I do have a tinge of it in there. but he hasn't been playing the greatest golf. Like he's been really struggling. I don't know if he's recharged again now that we've had the President's Cup, now that we've had some time off. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but I'm going to continue to kind of just let him do his thing. He's $10,800, back-to-back defending champion, going for a three-peat. It's mostly been putter and approach game at this golf course for him. The putter has been field average, over the last little while. So fourth for me, third for safety. I get it. I think he's going to be very popular based off the course history, going for a third win here. I did see your model, Spencer, and the only thing I saw was Tom Kim was sitting somewhere else, not fourth. So we can get to him there, but who is I'll go with my third. I said Matt McCarty, so give me your third guy there, Spence.
My third player will be Beau Hossler, and I want to save the Tom Kim conversation for when we get to wherever I have him between 1 and 2, because he is in one of those two slots there. The thing with Kim, and I think you brought up a lot of good points that we can touch on, and so that can be a conversation that we can have in a second, but Beau Hossler being number 3. So I got into the space. I've told this story, I don't know if I've ever done it with you, Byron, but I've told this story numerous times throughout the years, to where I got into this industry in 2017, and I started originally with my own website. I was just writing for my own website, teeoffsports.com. I had just created all my stuff and was putting it up there, and we were getting, I don't know, Byron, 3 views a week, until this started to pick up at a certain point. And fortunately, in 2018, right before the Masters, I caught on with Rotoballer, and then history ends up being everything that's transpired from there. But when I wrote about this tournament in 2017, and this was a very big event for me to be writing about, because 1, I was relatively brand new. I'd only done it for a couple months. 2, it's my hometown event. So I felt like there's a lot of, chips on the table there, where I had pushed the chips all in. And I made a very bold declaration on that show, to where I said, Beau Hossler is going to capture his first PGA Tour title this weekend at the Shriners. And if it's not this week, it will come eventually at the Shriners within the next couple years. And obviously we're 8 years or whatever it is at this point past that. And he has not captured that title yet. And we're still pushing in that direction of, it just hasn't happened. And if you want to look in 2017, he held the overnight lead with JJ Spawn on the first day. He ended up getting himself to Sunday right in contention to win it. He shoots a 73. He falls to 7th. You look last year, he holds the overnight lead on day 1 with JT Poston. He ends up spiraling a little bit on the leaderboard, pushes himself back again. Hossler is getting closer. He should have won maybe Keith Mitchell should have won if we get technical with it at the Sanderson, but I think Hossler, from a statistical perspective, really should have been the victor in that tournament. And he had every opportunity to win it in certain portions of that if he would have done 1 or 2 things different. Obviously, there was a ruling at the end there, and there was a lot of things that came into play. But I love this course for Beau Hossler. And he's another name, just like Harry Hall, that he's going to be extremely popular here this week. And I don't think you're getting an ownership discount or rebate of any kind. You kind of have to know what you're signing up for if you're going to play him. But this is a spot where, until Hossler proves otherwise to me, and I don't want to miss the window here where the form looks good, the statistical profile looks good, he has more or less the course history I'm looking for. This is as close as he's ever been to winning a golf tournament, in my opinion. And my model is not a model that ever grades him in this capacity of being a top 3 golfer. So when you get these outlier marks, like I got in 2017 and I've gotten again this week, I'm going to be more willing to trust my data and the math, even if that means that I almost have to lock button him in certain spots. So I am going to do that with Beau Hossler. I'm going to live with the results of whatever ends up transpiring with it. I'll let you talk about him. I don't know if you have the same view there, Byron, but I like Beau Hossler a lot.
Spence, he's 30-1 out there to win the tournament. He's 45-1 to lead after round 1. You've mentioned he is the number 1 strokes gainer in round 1.
Yeah.
So you're getting almost double his getting 50% additional odds on that first round leader market, which I think I'll just be taking. I'll follow you to the promised land and then take one sip and leave.
Yeah.
I'll let you continue to tempt the crocodiles in the pond there. But Bo Hostler is a great first round leader bet, in my opinion, at almost double the odds at some spots. So I see Bet Rivers as a 50 out there, which I'll be jumping on after the show. So there's lots to like about big bitch boy ho. Bo.
Really quickly before we move on, Byron. So I went to that 2017 tournament and I felt like, to my 3 followers and 3 viewers at the time, I had made a very bold stance of what I had taken. And so I had talked about the Hideki story before, and that came a couple years later, but where I walked around and Hideki walked side by side with me. But the same kind of situation happened a little bit differently with Bo, where I walked around with him for almost the entirety of his round. I missed the first handful of holes, walked the last 10 or 11 holes with him. And I was the only person there and just giving him little subtle golf claps along the way. And I ended up seeing him. I ended up going out there, I believe 2 days. There may have been a third day that I ended up going out there, but every single time I saw him out there, he would come over to me and say, hey, thanks for cheering me on. I don't think he will remember me, obviously, but if I'm out there, we might have to have the Bo Hostler 2.0 experience to where I will be rooting him on from the corner for 4 days.
Let's go, Spence. You need to just print out your write-up that you did for him and just print it onto your shirts and just have it there so you can remember exactly where you are. But, at some point, dude, I mean, he got into a goddamn playoff. Yeah. He's lost now to Ian Poulter and Kevin Yu, of all people, in the play. What? It was Kevin Yu, right? That one. Yeah. Out of all people, Kevin Yu just shows up and wins this thing. So incredible stuff there. Can he continue? We've got 3 top 12s in the last 4 starts. I mean, that's some really good golf, including a playoff loss. So I get it. Let's see what he can do. First round leader, 45-1. Great. Outright, 30-1. Jump on both of those people. I think that's. I might just join you, Spencer, because I'm clueless when it comes to outrights. Anyway, for me, number 2. Have you mentioned number 2?
I have not yet.
Go ahead.
Number 2 for me, and while I can't get him to be number 1 in my model, I would probably make an argument that when ownership ends up coming into play here, I would not be shocked if he ends up being my favorite target in this $10,000 plus range. I happen to think, and maybe we can even have this Tom Kim conversation right now, because Tom Kim is number 1 for me. Taylor Pendrith is number 2. There are 3 really good golfers in my mind that are $10,000 and up. You don't always get these in this watered down sort of a contest. Tom Kim experiences pretty much exactly what you discussed. And this is the back-to-back defending champion of this tournament. I understand what I'm about to say, but negative leverage or trajectory for upside from a statistical perspective. And that's just because from a statistical standpoint, he's not necessarily checking the boxes as well as he had in his 2 previous victories here. I do think you can make an argument that the President's Cup, and we even saw it 2 years ago, he gets motivated from this. He really finds form and is able to carry it once he does. So I think he's very safe. You can't go victory in your 2 attempts and not be safe for the course. But Pendrith is the one that I continue to find myself, at least from a betting answer, the most intrigued on. He was fractionally behind Tom Kim from an overall rank. When I ran this from a head-to-head model, it was minus 108 plus 108 that Tom Kim was over Taylor Pendrith. So we're talking about a very small difference between the two. And I don't know if we're going to end up getting there. If there is a world where we can get a reduction in ownership on Taylor Pendrith, the current form looks phenomenal. The form and the stats for this week look phenomenal. I bet Taylor Pendrith at 27-1 when it opened early today. It's dropped a little bit. I don't know what the best you can find currently right now is. I think anywhere in that 25-1 range still makes sense, but there was a big difference in my mind when, Pendrith is, we'll just call it 25-1, and then, Tom Kim is 12-1, maybe 14-1 if you really shop around. To me, this is the 1A, 1B of this tournament where one was essentially doubled in odds. So I'm curious to see what the ownership will tell the story of that, because we don't have a massive price difference. It's 10,800 versus 10,200. if Pendrith ends up experiencing that same reduction in ownership, I'm going to 100% be more owned with Taylor Pendrith there. So while he is not number one for me, I would say he's probably, as of this moment, ownership aside of not knowing exactly where it's going to land, I would say he's probably my favorite player, 10,000 up, just because I do think you get a rebate.
And we're 50 minutes into the show, and I'm sure someone's wondering, yeah, like, how can you like a second-ranked golfer over the number one guy in your model? But again, we are just here to – these are what the models are projecting for us. They aren't gospel. They are guiding us in a direction that we can then fork off and decide, okay, do we want to go left to Pendrith, who's cheaper, potentially lower owned, blah, 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 or do you want to go with the Chalk City down to Tom Kim Lane and just, hang out with everyone on that highway that's going to be chock-a-block, So this is kind of what we're saying. Again, with the betting side of things, Tom Kim's number is so depleted. There's no market that I can get to him on in the placements, because when you're starting at 12-1, you are not going to – you're plus 280 for a freaking top five. That's not even Scotty shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's crazy stuff. Scotty was a little lower than that, but still. We're not talking about Scotty Scheffler.
He's not Scotty, exactly, at the end of the day. And it's a different situation. And I will say this, just to kind of maybe not go so strong with the statement that I said before. If we're talking betting, I think it's night and day, just because you get double the price there. If we're talking DFS, let's see where the ownership ends up landing. I just envision this being a scenario where Tom Kim, more likely than not, is going to be – I don't see a world how he's not a top 3 owned player. And it doesn't mean that I won't even have him in my player pool. I'll probably, as of this moment, plan to use a little bit of safety. And normally when I do that on golfers that are the number one player, I do a show with Nick Bretwish, and he's much more, I would say, boom or bust on his weeks, to where, he completely puts somebody in the pool or he completely removes them from the pool. I'm more inclined to play some defense in some of these spots. And I'm giving this answer not knowing what Tom Kim's ownership is. I'm more inclined, though, to say that I'm okay playing Tom Kim in some percentage of builds and just going much more overweight in the spots of super aggressive on Bo Hostler, super aggressive on Taylor Pendrith. Unfortunately, a lot of these names that we've talked about so far, I do project to be some of the more highly owned players. So with that, you're going to have to find leverage in some spot. Maybe that's something that we can figure out as the week goes on. But I do think at the end of the day, Kim and Pendrith are the 1A, 1B in this tournament.
Yes, I agree. And that's the thing. You playing the cards that get dealt your way. If you get a low-owned option, off we freaking go. So I have Taylor Pendrith, actually, Spencer, as my top guy for upside. Second for safety. Number one for safety is Keith Mitchell, which is hilarious considering his track record, yeah. But what I want to mention about Pendrith, in about a quarter of his starts, he's finishing inside the top 10. That is delightful. There's only Hayden Springer, Michael Thorbjornsen, and Matthew McCarty, whatever you want to go with, yeah. All right. We've got some seriously good top 10 metrics for LTP. And when I was at Montreal, Spence, I saw him playing. God damn, he hits these irons like I do. It is just a sclaffy, low disaster. It's just super weird watching him play golf, but somehow he gets it done. Guy is a baller. He's my number one ranked guy. I love his upside from a top 10 perspective as well. And we will be betting him top 10 at plus 275. I think when you're getting Tom Kim at plus 280 for a top 5 and you get Taylor Pendrith at a top 10 for the exact same number, basically, this is exactly, I'm glad that I'm putting this bet out there, because that summarizes the situation. The market is too defensive on Tom Kim right now and giving us zero love. So give me Taylor Pendrith at plus 275 for a top 10. I'll be playing him a lot in DFS at $600 cheaper than Tom Kim, especially ranked higher than him. Spence, who's going to be more owned, Tom Kim or Taylor Pendrith?
I think it has to be Tom Kim. And it kind of goes back to the answer that I had just given for the head-to-head matchup. It's minus 108, plus 108. You have virtually the same golfer there that you're looking at. It's a very small difference between the two, but the market is extremely defensive when it comes to Tom Kim, whether that's the outright number, whether it's any of these placement markets. And I understand why that is, but it really, from these betting markets, just makes him completely untouchable. For DFS, there's a different discussion that can come into play as we move across this week. But betting wise, like if Tom Kim wants to go back to back to back and he becomes like the Michael Jordan of TPC Summerlin here, he can have that. And by the way, that picture there, that's Penny Hardaway hitting a shot on Michael Jordan. So
I can't see it. All right, we'll get you in there at some point, Spence. We just got to get you taking a good photo of the studio once it's done and put it out there for the people to see. Or we'll just get you starting the show one time, so you can really zoom in on the background and see what who's Penny Hardaway. Like, you see, this is the thing for me. I'm a South African. You are bringing up all these guys from when I was still watching like soccer and cricket and rugby. So apologies there. I only showed up in 2011, So Penny Hardaway must have been done with his nonsense by then.
Penny Hardaway he got drafted in 93. I would say he was meant to be the heir apparent to Michael Jordan. Injuries, unfortunately, ended up unraveling and derailing his career. He suffered a lot of knee injuries over the course of time. That picture that's there.
Everyone, yeah.
That's Shaq, Shaquille O'Neal, and Penny Hardaway. That's actually from Joe Nicely. He sent that to me. One of the nicest things anybody's ever sent to me. He sent that to me a handful of years ago. He knows my love for Penny Hardaway. A handful of the things on that wall back there are actually Penny, but Penny had massive superstar potential. He somewhat reached it for 2-3 years before the knees kind of gave out on him, unfortunately. But that Magic team, it's funny how history ends up changing on itself, because they made a finals run where Nick Anderson from the Magic ended up missing a handful of free throws that ended up losing them game 1. And then they ended up getting swept in the series. And then Shaq ended up leaving. There was a money situation between, Penny was wanting to get the money. Shaq was wanting to get the money. I don't think Shaq wanted to play second fiddle to Penny. Shaq left for the Lakers. He ends up forming the history with Kobe. And, Shaq and Kobe ended up having their problems down the road. But it's funny how a title doesn't get had from Orlando in that season. And all of a sudden, it's Shaq and Kobe that are the legendary combination. And Penny gets not necessarily forgotten. I think from like 90s kids, like I'm going to be 35 in December. Any of the 90s babies out there from the United States, I feel like a lot of people really love Penny. But I think people over the course of time have forgotten how good Penny actually was in his prime there.
It sounds like not Chan Kim.
Anthony Kim.
Anthony Kim. Gosh darn it. We got Tom, Anthony, Michael, Anthony Kim of the NBA, right? Like flashy. Was he flashy at all? Or like charismatic?
It's funny because he had a very small voice. Like, he was not an boisterous person. A lot of his Nike commercials, there was a little Penny doll, and the little Penny doll was played by Chris Rock. And so Chris Rock possessed all of that, like loud, brash, everything that Penny wasn't. But Penny's game was very flashy on the court. He was a 6'6", 6'7" point guard, kind of that same brand of what Magic Johnson was. The jump shot at times was hit and miss. And I think that's unfortunately when you suffer knee injuries and you rely on your athleticism, and that athleticism goes, he wasn't able to continue with his career in the same capacity as maybe somebody like Larry Johnson, who played for UNLV. He suffered a back injury, but then developed into becoming a 3-point shooter. Like, Penny never quite had that, but that career ended up going to, I believe, 2004. So he had about an 11-year career. It's just, the last 6-7 years was him trying to find the fountain of youth, trying to find the pre-injuries that he just never could get back to.
Golly, Spence, we got to just do like deep dives of basketball. You got to educate me. We'll do like at the end of each show, you'll maybe do something like this and then I'll do some rugby or cricket or something that you absolutely know nothing about as well. But we got 15 minutes before MNF with my boys go up against the Buffalo Bills. So let's do some gourmet cray rapid fire type stuff here through the tiers of the DFS salaries. I do think let's just speak about leverage options, Spencer, and potential fades and things like that. Davis Thompson in the 10K range, the optimal leverage item. I never even mentioned him as my second ranked upside option. Love him. So I could potentially see myself doing a Davis Thompson, Taylor Pendrith, leaving Tom Kim all the way alone and kind of just playing it that way this week. What you doing in the 10s?
I think that's a very savvy route to consider. I'd have no issues with that whatsoever.
Great. So then you go ahead and tell me what you're doing in the 9s.
I'm going to eat the chalk with Bo Hostler. I think he will be the highest owned player in that range. And I do think Harry Hall, unfortunately, will be the highest owned player in the $8,000 range. But, there's ways to create leverage by being more aggressive to those two names and still finding a way to get different. And it's the options like the Taylor Pendress, the Davis Thompsons, and maybe you go a little bit underweight to a Tom Kim or something like that route. But it's probably Bo for me is going to be the name in the 9,000s that I will have the most exposure to. And as I talked about, like McCarty was a value. Seamus is very close to being a value. And then pretty much everybody else was a negative value inside of my sheet. So don't have a ton of interest out of those names that I mentioned in that range.
I'll give Eric Cole a mention as well as we kind of getting out of here. These are guys we've spoken about too. We kind of just now assessing these guys instead of just in a vacuum amongst their peers of that salary tier. So I'll add Eric Cole to the mix. Definitely not playing Keith Mitchell. Definitely not playing Tom Hoagie in GPPs, playing him in cash like we discussed, and along with Kurt Kitayama as well. Tom Hoagie, Kurt Kitayama, not a terrible starting duo for cash games if you want to save some salary there too. In the 8s, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say in my DraftKings article, the one name that I mentioned is the option in that $9,000 range that is out of my player pool right now would be Keith Mitchell. That's the only name that I've technically crossed out, but I'll move us into the 8,000s. I talked about that I'm going to be playing Harry Hall. For me, the leverage option is Maverick McNeely. I really think that there is a potential here that Maverick McNeely is going to be the lowest owned player, $8,000 and up. And I think it could be very substantially so just because of the back-to-back missed cuts that he's provided. And I've heard a lot of rumblings in the space that he's an overrated commodity even before he had missed those cuts. And as I said, you can make that argument and that's fine. And we were talking about a golfer that was in the upper 9,000s and a golfer that was 20-1. I think it's a different point of view that we can look at here, and a golfer that from every factor of what I would like, forget the course for one set, like forget the actual course. Like if we look at his course history, you're going to have the result last year where he came 10th, but then it's miscut 37th. But throw away those results for 1 second. It's what I go back to originally. Where does Maverick McNeely find or is projected to find his best success? Desert courses, West Coast, bent grass greens. Like he's checked TPC properties. He's checking all the boxes over and over again. And if we're going to go from the back-to-back missed cuts as the reasons why he's not playable, I understand there's volatility that enters the mix with it. But it's one thing when you take a volatile golfer and he's 17% owned and you're buying into like bad volatility, bad chalk there. It's another thing when a golfer is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% owned and their ceiling potential is as high as anybody else. It's kind of the conversation that if we wanted to have, and I don't think we're going to get there, where even a Keith Mitchell, like if you told me Keith Mitchell was 2% owned, he's not going to be. But if you told me he was 2% owned, all of a sudden I would say, okay, he's inside the top 6 of my model for these statistical profiles. For whatever reason, the stats haven't hit here for a course that is very predictive. I'd be willing to play him for 5, 6, 7% and take my chances. You get very minimal exposure there to still get massively overweight. I think with McNeely, I'm kind of fine pushing this out into that 15% range and just saying that I'm going to probably be 3, 4% higher than everybody else.
Spence, I love it. And, going back to the 2 missed cuts 2 and 3 years ago, didn't he have back surgery towards the end of last year? He could have been plagued by these kind of things. He's also a totally different golfer now. Yeah. I think he's definitely grown as a professional. Love that play. $8,600. Let's party. Adam Hadwin, usually course history guys gain a bit of ownership, but man, he's been playing some bad golf. So if the course history people go to him, I'm out. If they don't, I'm in. That's just the situation there with Hadwin at $8,900. I'll take a gamble on him. And then another interesting name. I've mentioned Ben Griffin as well. Jonathan Vegas. Now, JT Poston, also solid option, but also, great history yet too. But Vegas, I think, could also be one of these guys that's kind of sneakily unowned. this week at $8,000 flat with Ben Griffin, JT Post, and Harry Hall, JJ Spahn around him. We can see him getting neglected a touch. And he's had 5 top 40s in his last 6 starts, including a win at the 3M, which this ain't no 3M or whatever. But, some people have compared Minnesota to Las Vegas. I'm just joking over there. But we can expect something good from him. He's playing some solid, consistent golf right now. So if he can get it together at 8K, probably sub 10% owned, if we're being honest here, I think I'll be going to Jonathan Vegas in a big way. And then Cam Davis will be my guy. Top 5 for me in upside. Got to respect that. He's $8,800. That's a serious value for me that my model's telling me to go with over there, along with the top 20 at plus 187. So in the 7, Spencer, Eric Van Rooyen, 18th in upside for me. Austin Eckroat, 33rd in upside. Chan Kim, I can go there at 7,600. Ben Silverman. Ben Silverman's doing some good stuff. He's a safe option at $7,400 for sure. Guys finishing inside the top 40 every other tournament he plays in. Good to see over there, right next to Ricky Fowler. Gosh, how the mighty have fallen with that one. So those are some names in the 7s. Patton Gaziah, 19th for me in both metrics. Very much like him. Patrick Fishburne as well, $7,200. And I'll be going with Daniel Berger again. Just taking a gamble on this guy. He made the cut, I think, on the number. And then what did he do? He finished inside the top 20 or top 30. He was looking like really in the mix. Finished what? 35th.
35th.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there. But go ahead, Spence. Hit me with your 7th option. 7K, guys.
Yeah, I love the Silverman call on your part. We've talked about JJ Spahn a lot. I will be playing JJ Spahn. I think Patrick Fishburne, this is an ultimate buy low spot for him. This is a golfer that we are looking at that I made this argument last week that I thought the best player in the field was Seamus. I thought the second best player was Patrick Fishburne. And I thought the third best player was Keith Mitchell. And everything is a course specific answer that I'm always going to give in these spots. And while my numbers have gotten marginally worse for Patrick Fishburne from the very high end marks that we were receiving, everybody played him last week at his hometown narrative thing. And he ends up burning the industry because of his lack of par 5 scoring that he could put together. I think this is a nice spot for it to consider him here. Cheaper price tag. He's dropped nearly $2,000 in price because of what he's produced. And it's like, that's to me is where it's just too large of an overcorrection that's occurred. I considered him as an outright bet. I didn't end up getting there. I think he's intriguing for GPPs though. And if we want to go further into an outright and you want to bet him as an outright, like there's a lot worse bets that I have myself made over the last year than Fishburne to win a golf tournament. Like we just watched McCarty win in his 3rd start. Right. Fishburne is a very good golfer that could do a very similar thing and win early in his career.
Yeah. I mean, a $2,000 drop, Spencer, is ludicrous. I mean, this guy's got a 6th and a 3rd in like his last 5 starts. I mean, let's go. That's the way to play DFS is capitalizing on overcorrections like that. So let's get Patrick Fishburne right in the mix. Thoughts on Charlie Hoffman as well, somewhere as a complete no-brainer. Took a photo with him at the President's Cup. Guy's a cool dude. He also likes this West Coast, like the Waste Management Phoenix Open. I'm just using that literally as the only option, but this seems like a similar kind of a comp course in a way.
Well, it's the West Coast UNLV narrative that he brings to the table also. I mean, it's another golfer that's very comfortable when we talk about desert golf at the end of the day. My model is indifferent on him. Like I don't have a strong lean one way or another necessarily. Maybe part of that just has to do with this lack of course history that he is taken to the table here. And I don't know exactly what that reason would be, but from like a statistical perspective, he's very break-even-ish, I guess would be the best way to word it. But
it is very bad. But you know what? He's playing good golf right now, though. That's the I don't know. Sorry, not to mean to cut you off there. Any other 7K guys?
I like the Eckroat call that you mentioned. My model doesn't necessarily, but I thought he was a name that I expected to be higher than what he ended up producing in my sheet. Matty Schmid graded well for me. Talked about Chan Kim a little bit. Kazire was a very nice value in my sheet. He was one of the best names, 7,300 and up value-wise. Fishburne that I guess he's technically like, what was Fishburne last week? 9,600?
I don't know.
I think he's dropped like $2,400, which is just outrageous.
That is I wonder what the biggest drop in salary is ever, or at least I can probably look it up. But that is insane.
Well, the interesting thing about this one is it's one thing when in a bad, like let's just say you have two different fields and you play in a bad field and you're $9,700, $9,600, and you give a poor performance, and the next week you're in a major, you're in a tournament with Scotty Scheffler and Xander Schauffele and all these names, and you drop down to 6,500 and you've experienced this $3,000 dip, and you're like, well, different quality of field. It makes a lot of sense. This is a very on par field. It's maybe a little bit like the same field in reality. Like maybe where the strength gets better is McCarty is now a PGA Tour winner, and Davis Thompson and Taylor Pendrith, like those are the names that push, and Tom Kim, like they push us a little bit to be a better field, but in reality, the difference becomes 96 versus 89, 80, whatever you want to call it. You don't lose $2,400 overnight.
Yeah, like what happened to like the 30 guys, 40 guys that have just jumped him like randomly, like it doesn't make any sense. So wild situation, buddy. Wild situation. Henrik Norlander, Ben Coles, either interest you at all?
Norlander was a value in my model. Coles is technically a value too. My only concern with Coles, I had a lot of exposure to him last week. He's leading after 2 rounds. He's the worst golfer on the course over the last 2 days. He drops outside of the top 40 after being in the lead. Maybe that narrative ends up pushing people off of him. And if that ends up being the case, he is a fringe top 40 player again for me this week. But I did think that we had a handful of names, like Norlander being one of the prime examples there. Chandler Phillips, Jacob Bridgman, Justin Lauer. It's kind of a lot of these names that we've talked about over and over again over the last 6 months, it feels like. And these are names that have just never experienced. They're almost like, to me, Jacob Bridgman in a really good field is like 6,900. And then in a really bad field is 7,100. Like you never really get a difference from what his price tag is from a good or a bad field. So, names like him and Phillips, I will be throwing darts on as just, I don't know what their ownership will be, but high upside plays for me in this lower price section.
I may or may not be betting Jacob Bridgman top 20 because I've got him 18th in safety. So he's finishing top 20 like 1 in every 3rd starts, which is pretty good for a guy that's $7,100 hairs. So in the sixes, Spence, Rico Hoey, $6,900. I mean, this dude can just jam when he's feeling it. So I don't mind him a little bit. Some Hayden Springer, like I mentioned. Hayden Springer's done some very interesting stuff. Got a 7th at the John Deere and 8th at Sanderson, miscutting everywhere else. So if you're going to be playing him, it's GPPs or bust.
Yeah.
Off we go. Like that to me is just the way to go with guys like this. And you can be heavy on him. Like by heavy, you can have him in like 10, 15% of your lineups and go nuts because he's going to be 1-2% owned. By default, guys in the 6Ks are usually not more than 3% owned unless it's a chalky misprice. Then we start seeing like 10, 12, 13s. But in general, these dudes in the 6s typically get left alone. So any other names that you kind of fancying in the 6s, Spence? I'll wrap up the bottom once you're done.
When I ran this for upside and overall rank, the 5 best golfers for me, this is no particular order. Rico Hoey, Chad Ramey, K.H. Lee, Hayden Springer, Carson Young. A name like Hayden Springer and Carson Young would be more of those boom or bust, high upside sort of plays that, as you just talked about, you can get overweight by playing still a very small percentage of them and shooting for the upside. Thought Hoey, just on the surface level of this answer, was probably the most mispriced player. This is another golfer. I mean, it's not the Fishburne example of losing $2,400, but this was a name that was in the high 7s just a couple tournaments ago, give or take there. And all of a sudden now he's lost $1,000, give or take, on his price. So thought he was good. I thought Ramey had better safety numbers and upside numbers, but inside the top 35 for me overall. And then K.H. Lee, I don't know what to think about KH Lee because I seem to get burned on him over and over again. And we know on TPC properties that he has found success in the past. I don't know if that narrative has run too rampant in the space to where everybody just sees a TPC course and wants to play KH Lee now, and the leverage that you were creating is now all of a sudden gone. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but he was a top 40 player for me overall and a top 40 player for upside. We're talking very fringe in that range. I mean, like he's right at the very bottom of it, but typically when you fall into the $6,000 section, you're picking and choosing one or two qualities of a reason a golfer can possess higher upside. I'm never looking in the $6,000 range for cut makers that are going to come 52nd.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I want the boomer bust target that when Hayden Springer pops, he pops for a top 10. And when he misses the cut, I have him in 8 to 12% of builds. And it's, just hopefully the other lineups make more sense around him. But that's probably it for me. Like past a lot of those names, like Grayson Sigg at 6,700 or David Skins at 6,600 would be the last two names for me of like true playability. Like past that point, I don't think I want to go cheaper on the pace scale than that. You can talk to me about some names. Maybe you can come up with a name or two there, but I'm probably going to try not to get lower than that.
How about Rafael Campos? He's got a 30th and a 13th in, I always go with this guy. Like
I seem to also.
He's a ball striking beast. This guy's a savage when it comes to the ball striking, Spence. He's, 66th in strokes gained approach and he's $6,200, so you're going to get weeks where he can just really light it up with the irons and get a bit lucky with the putter. I don't mind him. Robbie Shelton, is he a UNLV guy? Because he's got some great course history at this venue with a 15th, a 34th, and a 42nd going on down over here. And then I wanted to pull up Chesson Hadley as well. I think he's got some good course history at this venue too. I don't know what his price is. I'm assuming he's been playing poor enough. He's 7 flat. So, we got a 7th, a 37th, a 27th, and an 18th in 4 of his last 5 at this venue, which is good to see for a 7K guy. I know we bottom of the 6s, but I'm kind of just bouncing around you as we get out of here. And then there was one other dude I wanted to mention. There's Dan McCarthy at $6,000. Just mention him because he's got the same name as our winner from last week. And then I think that's it for me, Spence. I don't think I'm going to go with anyone else outside of these guys. Maybe Tom Whitney, taking off a top 11th last week, $6,200. Again, you're playing him in a smidgen of your lineups, nothing too crazy.
Yeah, I don't have a massive takedown in this section. Like I said, like Sig and Skins are probably like the last two guys that I'm realistically considering. There are a handful of course history players that there were names, and Luke List is not at this tournament, but Luke List was one of those names that popped for me in this area. Like it was always like List and Hadley and Matthew Neesmith and all these guys that produce results on this course. Hadwin obviously being the high-end answer for this week of his price. But, it'll be interesting to see where Hadley and Neesmith and those names end up landing, because there has been a consistent nature with them, specifically Neesmith, like 42nd, 2nd, 14th, 8th, 18th. Very consistent results. And as you noted early on this, Byron, and I'll let you get to the Jets game here because it's starting now, but there is a predictive course history at this venue. We've seen it over and over again of guys that can find success yearly. So I'm never going to be the one that gets necessarily caught for the only reason I'm playing somebody is course history. But when the course history ends up merging in with the statistical profile, I am much more likely to go more aggressive. And that's kind of for me where I am more willing to go Harry Hall and Bo Hostler and say, I understand they're going to be popular, but it's not the course history answer of why my model is propelling them. I run more course history than you do on a weekly basis. And I ran more course history than you did this week, but it's also not some astronomical total to where it's going to propel my model one way or another. Like I'm always trying to find the course specific outlooks. I'm trying to find guys that my model likes more than the market for that reason, because what you will know is two things will happen. And I'll let everybody get out of here after this. Markets shift exponentially for two reasons. They either shift because of current form or they shift because of course history. And Michael Thorbjornsson last week is the prime example of that. I get him at 125-1 at the Sanderson. He all of a sudden becomes 40-1, 45-1 at the Black Desert. That is way too dramatic of a shift there. Like, the market either had to be exponentially wrong, which I thought it was, but he was more of like a 60-1 golfer. And then all of a sudden the market gets really insecure on itself to where it doesn't want to take on extra exposure. And the course history answer ends up doing the same thing, probably at a lesser extent. But I just want everybody to keep that in mind as we're making outright bets, that is going to be where you lose value. And if you lose enough value enough times in the outright market, while it's very minimal risk and exposure that you're taking on, you never want to be taking guys at 30-1 that should have been 50-1, that a week ago were 125-1. Like, you're going in the reverse direction. I would rather go the Maverick McNeely route where I'm wrong. He's 55-1. He should have been 35-1. 3 weeks ago, he was 25-1. Like, we'll reverse build that profile there.
Let it come to you. Don't chase. I think that's a great, great way to end the show, Spencer. This is what we always do here on Rotoballer PGA Show. By the way, use code TOFF, use code Maniac, get 10% off all of our wonderful products over at rotoballer.com. If you have hung in here with us for 80 minutes, we appreciate every single one of you. And Spence, who's going to win this game tonight, bud? You can be honest with me. By the way, I'm rocking my Robert Sala all gas, no break shirt. I'll add it to the pile of Jets paraphernalia and names and T-shirts and jerseys that no longer exist on this team. Did not expect Robert Sala to hit that bingo card this year.
I don't have an analytical take one way or another. This is nothing more than gut feel. So I don't this doesn't mean anything. I will say Buffalo wins the game, but there is definitely, if we keep talking about overcorrections to the market that are occurring, the Jets are starting to enter that end of the spectrum to where their odds to make the playoffs all of a sudden is enticing now because everybody's saying that they're fired their coach. Rodgers doesn't have it. We've gone a little too extreme with this in my mind of where the Jets are. I really like Buffalo in a vacuum situation, but who do you think is going to win? I think that's the one that's probably more of a real answer.
I think Buffalo wins. I have no idea. I don't know how we're going to play with this new head coach. But if we win this game, we're our first in the goddamn division. You know what I'm saying? Why are we firing our coach the week before? It doesn't make any sense. But hey, if you're swinging for upside, you swing for upside. So Woody Johnson on his presser said, yeah, I fired a lot of coaches in my day. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, if there's any course history to that, it's inverse, in my opinion. So let's get the Steelers managers in there and, have their 3 head coaches for the last 50 freaking years show up. That's what I'm looking for, not Woody Johnson firing guys in the middle of the season. I start speaking about the Jets for longer than 30 seconds, Spencer. Blood pressure through the goddamn freaking roof. So anyway, folks, we'll catch you guys Mondays, 7 Eastern, during the fall swing, right before Monday Night Football. We'll go back to the regular stuff in the normal season when there's no football kind of keeping you guys away from us because we appreciate you. We want you to hang out with us. Give it a like. Tell your people about it. Enjoy. Good luck this week. Catch all our stuff as we're getting through the content for you at rotoballer.com. Catch you guys next Monday. Peace.